This video deals with the main graph that you have to focus on when taking AP macroeconomics, and that's the aggregate demand graph. The first thing we always talk about with every single graph is to make sure you get the labeling right. Okay, so the vertical is price level, the horizontal is real GDP. You could put output, you could put national income. I've also seen it labeled on the AP, sometimes just Y, which is sort of the symbol representing national income. All of those things are fine, but I tend to prefer just putting real GDP there. And remember, real GDP is output, is national income. You can measure GDP through CIG net exports or wages, rents, interest, and profits, and that's where the income aspect comes in. Price level, as we see on the vertical, usually PL will get it done, okay, if you put price level. The aggregate demand graph goes down and to the right, like most of them do. It tends, as time goes on, that these lines tend to be drawn straighter by the AP board. When I learned to draw these, there was more of a curve. As long as it's going down and to the right, it's fine. And the short run aggregate supply curve goes up and to the right. And same thing about the straight versus the curved. One is not necessarily more correct than the other. It just tends to be drawn a little straighter more recently. A couple things that I always want you to label when we talk about this. The first thing I always want you to do is put CIG net exports, okay? Which net exports, if we remember, is just exports minus imports. The reason I want you to put that there, a couple of reasons. One is I think it keeps things a little organized in your head. You know if something is going to change, okay, if there's going to be a change in C, little deltas there, a change in I, a change in G, or a change in net exports, you know that aggregate demand is going to either increase or decrease. And I think that's a little helpful just to keep your thoughts together the day of the test and just when you're dealing with economics. The other reason is that sometimes it can count as your explanation point. Let's say that you are supposed to say that the change in interest rates will impact investment spending, which is part of aggregate demand, and you leave out that investment spending is part of aggregate demand. Usually the rater will see that you have investment as part of aggregate demand, and if you forget to do it, it's sort of like a seatbelt. You don't want to have to rely on it, but the day of the test, if you forget to cross your T's and dot all your I's, at least this will be there to kind of backstop it a little bit and can count sometimes as an explanation. Okay, so that's kind of the method behind the madness there. And really this graph, the main goal of this graph is to represent an economy, whether it be the United States or any other country, or whatever fictitious, macro land or whatever country that they come up with on the AP exam. And it's just important to keep in mind that this thing represents the economy as a whole. It's not an individual product like with the normal supply and demand graph. Okay, so we know what makes up aggregate demand: changes in consumption. Okay, here investment, government spending, or net exports. And the short-run aggregate supply curve, the determinants of the short-run aggregate supply, or what can cause those things to shift, are really changes in resource prices, changes in actions by the government, and changes in productivity. And if you remember this from earlier in the year, spelling's terrible, productivity. Spell check has absolutely ruined me. If you just think about this, it kind of forms this little word here, wrap. It's a way to keep this in order. Resource prices could be anything from labor costs, which is a resource. If you're a company, you buy labor. If you can buy it cheaper, it's going to cause the short-run aggregate supply curve to go to the right, which is represented by the blue. If it's more expensive, it's going to cause the short-run aggregate supply curve to go to the left, which is represented by the green. Actions by government. If government actions make it cheaper to do business, they deregulate things. They provide business tax breaks. Whatever it may be. Now, I'm not going to get into the moral argument of business tax breaks or regulations or deregulation. That's more of a political debate. But if you think about it, even in extreme bad examples, it's cheaper. For example, let's say, GE got in trouble a little bit and dumping some stuff into the river nearby here. it was cheaper for them to do that than dispose of it. That's why they did that. So once again, I'm not arguing the moral aspects of deregulation or maybe the need for it. What I'm saying is if it's deregulation, it is cheaper. That would shift the supply curve to the right. If there is more regulation, you do need to hire people in compliance. We're seeing that in schools. It's very expensive sometimes to comply with the state. That would shift the supply curve, the short-run aggregate supply curve to the left. Productivity. If productivity increases, supply goes to the short-run aggregate supply curve goes to the right. The main component of this tends to be changes in technology or improvements in technology. As technology progresses, the same number of humans can do more, or in many cases, less humans can do more. If you just look at the farming industry, for example, compare that to farming of 200 years ago, tractors, machines, and modern fertilizers, the productivity per farmer in this country has exploded, and most of that due to technology. On the other hand, if there is a decline in productivity for some reason, that would shift the aggregate supply curve to the left. The technology changes tend to be right shifts of technology. It's rare that you would adopt technology that would make you less productive. Just seems kind of counterintuitive there. So if any of those things change, you can have a shift of the curve, as I said. If resource prices go down, so if copper becomes less, if wages become less, oil becomes less, it goes to the right. If any of those things become more expensive, you have to pay your workers more, pay more for steel, pay more for oil. It shifts it to the left. Actions by government, deregulation goes right, more regulation goes left. Business tax cuts go right, business tax increases go left, and then productivity tends to be more of a rightward shift because you tend to increase productivity over time. Okay, and the same thing is now going to hold true for the aggregate demand curve. Let me just kind of just erase these lines here. Okay, kind of starting back with our original short-run aggregate supply, original aggregate demand. We'll have a blue be an increase. Okay. If there is an increase in consumption spending, an increase in investment spending, an increase in government spending, or an increase in net exports, in other words, we export more or start importing less, or a combination of both, aggregate demand would go to the right. If any of those things decline, you're going to see aggregate demand here go to the left. Okay? And usually fiscal and monetary policy also, while we're talking about it, act on the aggregate demand curve. Fiscal policy tends to impact, remember, if they just change government spending, this is direct. G either goes up or it goes down, more spending or less spending. Taxes tend to impact more C. Okay? Consumers either have more disposable income if their taxes go down, causing this to go up, so this is more indirect. And as taxes get raised, consumers have less to spend. In theory, aggregate demand would go down. Business taxes can also, it's the one double shift in the aggregate supply aggregate demand graph. There's technically two, but they don't really ask you to do the foreign exchange double shift for whatever the reason. If you think about this, changes of I, if there's more business taxes, there's less money to invest. If you're a company, if there's less business taxes, there's more money to invest. So that would be your double shift right there. So if any of those things change, and as I said, that's fiscal, those three things. Monetary tends to impact more the I here, okay? The Fed can change interest rates, and that causes more or less investment. And see the money market graph, or even the loanable funds graph video that I made of this kind of for more details on that. But as you change interest rates, the impact of a change in interest rates is a change in investment. Okay, so the monetary tends to impact that. It also impacts consumption, some interest rate sensitive consumption. If you think about it, like larger, interest rates do impact larger purchases a little bit more. And then the last thing here that can change is net exports. This could change for a variety of reasons. Maybe one country goes into a recession, so they stop importing stuff from another country. Let's say our country explodes out of the recession, we might start importing more from Europe as opposed to them from us. If currency changes, as a currency appreciates, you export more, you export less, you import more because your currency is now more expensive to buy. That means your products are more expensive to buy. But as your currency becomes more expensive, essentially it's cheaper to buy other currencies, therefore it's cheaper to buy foreign products. And if a currency depreciates, the opposite happens. Your exports go up because your currency is cheaper to buy, therefore your stuff is cheaper to buy. And other countries' currency is more expensive to buy, therefore their products are more expensive to buy. It's pretty straightforward in that regard. Okay, so this is just a very basic overview of the aggregate supply, aggregate demand graph. I will do another video that will be posted probably about the same time that will deal with adding the long run aggregate supply and aggregate curve, long run aggregate supply curve on the graph and what that means. Last thing before I go here, obviously as you move along here, okay, you see changes in price level. Okay, so if they ask you when there's a shift, what changes in price level? Well, that one's pretty easy. Just look at the graph. They might ask you what's happening to output. Remember, output is real GDP. But a couple of other things you can assume as you go right on this graph, okay, so you go right on the horizontal. So as you go from here to here, so a rightward shift means that real GDP is obviously increasing. That also means output's increasing. National income or income's increasing. Okay, income increasing, and employment is also increasing. Okay, or you can think about it as unemployment decreasing. Those are all logical assumptions you are allowed to make as you move right along the horizontal. The opposite of all of that is true if you go to the left. So if you go from this point here to this point here, well, then you can assume that real GDP goes down, output goes down, national income goes down, employment goes down, unemployment, if you will, goes up. Okay, so you are allowed to make all those assumptions when you're dealing with this graph as you're moving along there. And as I said, the price level or inflation is pretty obvious. You just kind of look where the new intersection is and you would select the correct answer from that. It's kind of what I refer to as cheating. If you just draw the graph, do the shift, you can then see what happens to price level, inflation, real GDP, output, income, employment, unemployment, whatever they tend to ask you. Okay, I hope you find this video helpful, and as I said, look for the other video that deals with the long run aggregate supply curve.